$2 trillion appeared in a single year. 3 people ended up owning more than 170 million combined. But this isn't a story about greed, and it isn't about injustice. What's unsettling is that the system kept making them richer, even when they no longer had to do anything at all. By the time people noticed the gap, it was already too late. Inequality had always existed. Rich and poor weren't new ideas. History was full of them. What changed wasn't the distance. It was the velocity. In a single year, global billionaire wealth increased by roughly $2 trillion. Not revenue, not economic output, personal wealth. That number matters, but not for the reason most people think. Because if wealth only accumulated slowly, society would adapt. Wages would adjust. Prices would stabilize. Institutions would catch up. But this didn't move slowly. Less than 40 years ago, in 1987, the idea of a centibillionaire barely existed. Forbes struggled to find even 2 individuals worth more than $20 billion, adjusted for inflation. At the time, that was unthinkable wealth. Today, $20 billion doesn't place you in the top 50. In under a decade, a new category of human appeared. People whose wealth no longer grew year by year, but multiplied automatically. This wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't because humans suddenly became more intelligent. Something else had changed. The common explanation was simple: technology, innovation, productivity. But that explanation failed one basic test. If innovation were the cause, wealth would follow creation. If productivity were the driver, income would rise alongside it. Instead, wealth accelerated. While income stalled, the system was no longer rewarding work. It was rewarding position. Assets didn't need to be sold. Decisions didn't need to be made. Risk didn't need to be taken in the traditional sense. Once you crossed a certain threshold, money stopped behaving like money. It became self-propagating. And that was the first illusion people missed. They kept asking why some people were rich, instead of asking why wealth itself had changed behavior. Because when wealth reaches a certain scale, it no longer depends on effort. It depends on rules. Rules that determined what was taxed, what was protected, and what was allowed to grow untouched. By the time centibillionaires became a recognizable group, the system that produced them was already mature, stable, efficient, and operating exactly as intended. The real story wasn't about excess. It was about design. For a long time, the story was comforting. Yes, some people were richer than others, but eventually, money would break apart. Taxes would redistribute it. Competition would erode it. New winners would replace the old ones. That assumption quietly stopped being true. In 2023, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in recorded history, more new billionaires were created through inheritance than through building companies from scratch. Not because entrepreneurship disappeared, but because the system no longer favored it. If someone under 30 appeared on a billionaire list, the odds were no longer mysterious. They didn't start at zero. They started inside the system. Inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about access. Access to legal structures. Access to capital at near zero cost. Access to rules most people never see. Wealth, once large enough, stopped resetting between generations. At the same time, another force was quietly removing friction. Monopoly. In earlier eras, monopolies controlled physical goods. Oil, steel, railroads. They eventually broke apart under pressure. Modern monopolies were different. Google didn't need to dominate every company. It controlled how information was found. Amazon didn't need to manufacture everything. It controlled how commerce moved. Meta didn't own all communication. It owned where social life took place. These companies didn't just sell products. They controlled infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't compete. It collects. Once a platform reached a certain scale, competition didn't disappear. It became irrelevant. The system rewarded this behavior. Regulation lagged behind. Antitrust moved slowly. Lobbying filled the gaps. What looked like innovation was often consolidation. What looked like success was frequently exclusion. Wealth didn't flow to whoever created the best product. It flowed to whoever controlled the bottleneck. And when inheritance met monopoly, the outcome was predictable. Money no longer needed to prove itself each generation. Power didn't need to be rebuilt. The system didn't punish concentration. It amplified it. By the time people noticed fewer paths upward, the starting line had already moved, and most people were running a race. That no longer restarted. Once wealth reached a certain scale, traditional income became irrelevant. Salaries? Taxes on wages? Those rules applied to everyone else. Not them. They didn't live off a paycheck. They lived off assets, stocks, real estate, art, rare collectibles, things that appreciate in value automatically. Taxes weren't triggered until a sale occurred, and they rarely sold. Instead, they borrowed. Using those same assets as collateral, they took out loans. Loans with interest rates lower than what the IRS would take from ordinary income. Loans that didn't count as taxable income. And with the money from those loans, they spent lavishly. Yachts, villas, art collections, private jets. But the assets themselves? Untouched, growing, protected. When debts came due, another loan replaced it. A loop. Repeat indefinitely. Then came the final step, death. When they passed, the loans were often paid off using the very assets that had grown in value. The remainder? Passed on to heirs using trusts and complex legal structures. Taxes minimized. Control maintained. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even obscure. It was standard practice for the ultra-wealthy. And here's the twist most people miss. The system wasn't broken. It wasn't being exploited. It was working exactly as designed. Wages were taxed heavily. Assets were lightly regulated. Wealth naturally gravitated toward those who already controlled it. The rules rewarded position over effort, accumulation over activity, continuity over reinvention. And the scale? It didn't matter. $10 billion behaved the same as $100 billion. The loop never broke. This is the mechanism few see when they look at headlines. Not greed, not talent, not luck. The system, quietly, had learned how to make money self-propagate. And by the time anyone realized it, the loop had already set the terms for the next generation. The wealth loop wasn't the only force shaping outcomes. There was a second layer, one that touched the entire economy. When new money was created, it didn't land evenly. It flowed first to banks, large corporations, and investors already holding assets. The rest of the population, they saw it last. Take a crisis, or a stimulus, or a major monetary injection. The wealthy acted before inflation hit. They bought stocks, real estate, commodities. Prices surged. Their assets appreciated. Meanwhile, ordinary people received their share after the cost of living had already jumped. Salaries didn't adjust fast enough. Rent went up. Groceries went up. Everything else followed. The numbers are stark. In the U.S., 1% of the population owns 93% of all publicly traded stock. When money flows, they benefit first. Everyone else catches up or struggles to. This effect magnifies inequality without anyone needing to cheat. It's baked into the system, rewarding position, punishing those without it. And the system didn't stop there. Crisis after crisis, 2008 housing crash, COVID pandemic demonstrated it. Ordinary people lost jobs, savings, homes. The wealthy? Their assets soared in value. The social consequences were predictable. The middle class shrank. Economic mobility slowed. Opportunities for the next generation diminished. Yet the system continued to operate efficiently. From a bird's eye view, it was perfect. Rules, taxes, loans, and policies all aligned to amplify existing advantages. Politics was just another mechanism. 158 families could fund half of a U.S. election cycle. Policy responded, not to citizens, but to those with money already at scale. By the time the public noticed, the advantages were embedded, normalized. The gap didn't seem unnatural. It felt inevitable. But this inevitability was carefully designed. And the question that never left the room: when a system rewards those already ahead, what chance does anyone else actually have to catch up? By now, the patterns were clear. The loops, the flows, the structures. Nothing had broken. Nothing had been hijacked. Inheritance, monopolies, buy, borrow, die, early access to money. They weren't anomalies. They were features. The system rewarded them, automatically, without human error. The consequences were visible everywhere. Social mobility stagnated. The middle class shrank. Opportunities concentrated in a small number of hands. Children born into wealth had access, education, and capital. Children born outside it faced long odds. Even talent and effort mattered less than the starting position. Policies and crises reinforced the loop. Stimulus reached the wealthy first. Tax rules favored the asset-rich. Political influence ensured regulations aligned with their interests. And yet, nothing about this system was illegal. Nothing was technically unfair. It was efficient, self-reinforcing, and invisible to those outside the loop. People looked for villains. They blamed greed. They blamed luck. They blamed markets. But the real driver wasn't a person. It was the design itself. And that design didn't vanish. It changed names. It evolved. It adapted. Every crisis, every policy shift, every market shock only refined it further. Position was rewarded. Effort became secondary. Wealth became its own engine. And the final, uncomfortable truth: if a system once created a world where a few could accumulate more than hundreds of millions of people combined, what makes anyone believe it has stopped functioning?